Welcome to The Thing About Austen, a podcast about Jane Austen's world. I'm Zan.
And I'm Diane. And this episode, we're talking about sea bathing. We want to first start by thanking everyone who is supporting us over on Patreon. Thank you so much.
So much.
And we have another batch of patron shoutouts. So here we go.
Anna.
Grapefruit Street.
Sophie Delhase.
Catherine C.
Joanne W.
Emily and Johnny.
Amanda C.
Shelley N.
Annie L.
Shawnee K.
Ariel Belk.
Marcia Hamley.
Christine.
Anna.
Mariana.
Amalie.
Joy Lemons.
Leela Srinivasan.
Joyce.
Antonio P.
Amy M.
Isabel W.
Liz Wheeler.
And last but not least, Count Fosco the cat.
I love it so much. So as always, if we mispronounced something, please let us know. And we did a little write-up on how we're doing our shoutouts over on our Patreon. But as a reminder, we're doing these in batches instead of reading a whole list all at once. So if you haven't heard your shoutout yet, it may just be because we haven't gotten to you yet. Or it could be because we're waiting to hear back from you on your shoutout preference.
Yeah, so we DM'd everyone to ask if you wanted first name only, first and last, etc. But we haven't heard back from everyone. So probably on the next episode, we will just move forward with shouting out these patrons, even if we haven't heard back. Our plan, and we did DM people about this, our plan is to do first name and last initial or first name only, depending on what Patreon has on file for you. But if you would prefer something different, please just let us know.
And if you would like to join our Patreon, you can head to patreon.com/thethingaboutausten. A fun thing that might be an incentive for some of you, we have released a little bonus episode at the Potato Patch level where we chat a little bit about Diane's recent trip to England and my past trips. We may or may not do something like this again, but we wanted to mention it here in case that is of any interest to you.
Might be of interest, could care less, you know? We don't know.
Could go either way, you know?
It was one of those things where we're kind of like, well, we sort of wanted to record it for ourselves to just, you know.
Memories.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay, so time to set the scene for this episode, which comes to us from Emma. John and Isabella Knightley, along with their children, are at Hartfield for a Christmas visit. Mr. Knightley has joined them for the evening, and the group of them are settled in and conversing. The Knightley Bros, as they are known around here, are chatting business and estate management, while Isabella and Mr. Woodhouse bond over their love of gruel, as one does.
Such a great conversation.
And then Mr. Woodhouse begins to hold forth on the subject of sea air and sea bathing. And spoiler alert, he does not approve.
So here is the passage from the book. And it's Mr. Woodhouse who's speaking first. "It was an awkward business, my dear, your spending the autumn at Southend instead of coming here. I never had much opinion of the sea air."
"Mr. Wingfield most strenuously recommended it, sir, or we should not have gone. He recommended it for all the children, but particularly for the weakness in little Bella's throat, both sea air and bathing."
"Ah, my dear, but Perry had many doubts about the sea doing her any good. And as to myself, I have been long perfectly convinced, though perhaps I never told you so before, that the sea is very rarely of use to anybody. I am sure it almost killed me once."
"Come, come," cried Emma, feeling this to be an unsafe subject. "I must beg you not to talk of the sea. It makes me envious and miserable, I who have never seen it. Southend is prohibited, if you please. My dear Isabella, I have not heard you make one inquiry about Mr. Perry yet, and he never forgets you." She's just like, we are changing the subject right now.
Hard shift. Such a funny passage. I mean, he's just said, "I think I nearly died in the sea." And she's like, okay, so we're going to move on from that.
We're going to try to move on from this. It doesn't work.
But we're really trying.
So sea bathing is the practice of bathing or swimming in the sea. That probably feels fairly self-explanatory.
Right.
But it had a fairly distinct purpose and practice when we look at it within the context of 18th and 19th century England.
It was different initially in connotation from swimming for pleasure or exercise, because sea bathing in the 18th century had specifically medical or therapeutic overtones during this time. As the practice gained popularity, then it slowly evolved into a more pleasure-based activity.
So we'll get into the kinds of practicalities and protocols for sea bathing in a few minutes, but we'll first jump into the medical context for sea bathing.
By the early 18th century, there was already a large body of medical advice surrounding the benefits of mineral springs and spas. This was the premise resorts like Bath were founded on. The idea was that soaking and sipping on the natural minerals in warm or hot spring water had health benefits.
Sea bathing grew out of that same basic concept. In 1753, Dr. Richard Russell wrote a wildly impactful work titled A Dissertation Concerning the Use of Seawater in Diseases of the Glands. This wasn't the first treatise on the benefits of the sea, of course, but it was the one that got serious traction in England.
Just as an example of a text that predates Russell, we have a text by Sir John Floyer called History of Cold Bathing, which was written in 1702 and already had its 5th edition by 1722. So we know it's kind of before this, that this is an established practice, but the one by Russell is the one that people really were paying attention to.
Yeah. The popularity is kind of building. In his dissertation, Russell argues that the sea had 4 distinctive properties: saltiness, bitterness, nitrosity, and unctuosity. He then explains that, quote, these and the many other qualities which evidently appear in seawater may very justly raise in us the greatest hopes and expectations, that from this part of nature also some signal advantages may arise to the practice of physic and the general good of mankind.
That's a benevolent statement. I love it.
I can't get over the unctuosity. This is a man who loved the humors,
Right?
He was on board with that.
Part of Russell's treatise encourages taking in the sea air, which he claims benefits from the perpetual cycles of evaporation and condensation that help circulate some of the sea's properties. Like we can have the unctuosity in the air.
Russell also encourages sea bathing, quote, that by the use of seawater and other helps, the glands may be scoured and cleansed of their obstructions, after which the whole habit of body ought to be strengthened and rendered firm by cold bathing in the sea, that it may be enabled to resist any new fluxions.
And this is all sounding very delightful, I'm sure. But Russell had some specific guidelines about what makes the ideal situation for sea bathing, stating that it, quote, should be clean and neat, and at some distance from the opening of a river, so that the water may be as highly loaded with sea salt and other riches of the ocean as possible.
Russell moved his practice to Brighton, and as we discuss in our episode on that location, it became one of the most prestigious new bathing spaces in England. So this is what really starts to kick off the sea bathing craze.
As Brian C. Southam writes in Jane Austen, Beside the Seaside, this appraisal came with the medical view of the sea as therapeutic, a source of good health, and it was this understanding together with the glimpse of its commercial possibilities that gave birth to the seaside resort.
By the mid-1780s, sea bathing had been practiced by King George III and other elites, and it really took off. It was no longer considered purely medicinal either. It became something that people enjoyed as part of a larger resort experience.
Southam explains that between the 1750s and the 1780s, these coastal resorts, quote, developed as serious rivals to the established inland spas, matching them as social gathering grounds, complete with all the facilities for gentlemanly entertainment and recreation.
So we spent some time on the medical history, the theory behind why doctors were sending their patients to the sea, but we want to talk about what that actually looked like, because not that many decades before Austen's time, the coast was the very last place where the rich and fashionable wanted to live.
In The Time Traveler's Guide to Regency Britain, Ian Mortimer explains that, quote, the sea was perceived as a threat, bringing invaders and harsh weather, and not as a thing of beauty. People only lived on the coast if they had to. Most ports were home to merchants and dock workers, fishermen and net makers, shipwrights, laborers, and their families.
So these were not initially obvious holiday destinations, and there are a few other things that impact this kind of coastal evolution over the course of the 18th and early 19th century. Before the French Revolution and the Napoleonic conflicts, wealthy English travelers, mostly gentlemen, did the grand tour on the continent. But when war comes, that's not really a solid option, so the British elite had to find somewhere else to go.
So the British seaside becomes, in a very real sense, a patriotic staycation. And that has all kinds of knock-on effects for the culture of these resort towns. It's not incidental that Austen is writing about Brighton and Ramsgate in Pride and Prejudice, about Lyme in Persuasion, because these are places where soldiers were stationed and military action was a real valence to all of the social interactions. This is very much of this time period.
But now let's focus on what it would have been like to arrive at one of these seaside resorts and what the experience of a sea bathing vacation might have been like.
Crack your knuckles, let's get into this. So the first thing worth mentioning is the timing of your visit. Initially, if you are under medical advisement, you are trying to go to the seaside during the coldest months, since the cold water and the bracing air were supposed to be the most beneficial.
For example, in her book, The Real Jane Austen, A Life in Small Things, Paula Byrne points out that Austen's cousin Eliza and her son Hastings, quote, spent December 1790 through to January 1791 in Margate, one of the most popular southeastern resorts. The poor little boy was forced to endure bathing in the severe conditions of frost and snow. And at the time, this was medically recommended as part of his treatment for what some scholars now assume to have been epilepsy.
January wasn't the most popular time to go sea bathing. If you were trying to split the difference between sea bathing for enjoyment while also capitalizing on the medical benefits, you were more likely to go to the seaside between September and November. This is generally when the Austens, for example, would attend, and it is also what kind of contextualizes why, in Emma, the Knightleys spend their autumn in Southend.
It's kind of a good in-between for getting some medical benefits and also having a nice family trip.
Family-friendly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because depending on where you're going, at least at the beginning of that fall season, even though the air might be cooling, the water could actually be at its warmest in late August or early September. So if you're planning your Regency-era staycation at the seaside and trying to split that difference, you go in the fall. And here are a few other things that you would plan on for your visit and daily schedule. And we did cover some of this in our episodes on Brighton and Weymouth, but it's been a while, so a little refresher for you all.
So first item of the day is sea bathing. And we'll talk more about what that whole procedure looked like, because it's probably not what we're all picturing. But that was followed by a prescribed rest period. And then you would do some sort of exercise, leisurely walks along the seafront, or a more energetic walk up on the headlands, or, getting a panoramic view. And then in the evenings, you would do kind of the social rounds.
This generally included options to attend the theater, card parties, musical gatherings, balls at the assembly rooms, etc. And the lending library, which was the social center of the resort town.
In her article, A Little Sea Bathing Would Set Me Up Forever, The History and Development of the English Seaside Resorts, Eileen Sutherland describes the lending library of a resort town as having, quote, all the functions of a gift shop, corner store, and stationers combined. It was where you would register your arrival, where you would look for the names of acquaintances who were also in town, where you would meet friends, plan your expeditions, share gossip and news, all of these things. It also sold books and newspapers and magazines, but it was really functioning as kind of this social switchboard at the time. And again, we've covered more of this in detail in previous episodes.
As for the other social structure in a resort town, John Walton, in The English Seaside Resort, A Social History, 1750 to 1914, writes that the seaside, quote, offered more practical advantages than the inland spas like Bath. He notes that, quote, although the formal social institutions of the spas soon appeared at the coastal resorts, the main focus of seaside activity was the open seashore rather than the pump room, and it was easier to economize by leading a quiet and private life without being completely cut off from the other visitors. The social obligation to participate in expensive assemblies and card parties was not as binding. So that's kind of the loose rhythm of a given day at a seaside resort. But let's get into the finer details of the actual sea bathing. We know that's why you're here.
Right. The moment we've been waiting for. So the ideal time to sea bathe was thought to be early in the morning, as early as 5 a.m. And again, this was because you wanted the benefits of the cold. Sutherland writes, medical opinion considered any unnatural opening of the pores of the skin to be dangerous, and hence bathing took place when the body and water were cold. So this is the idea of like, you're shivering on the shore, ready to get in. So your pores are all closed up and then you're going to get into the cold water. Again, think January, 5 a.m., heading down to sea. That is brisk.
So once you arrive at the beach, you get into a bathing machine. And this is one of those things where nothing quite does justice to the topic as hearing a contemporary description. Tobias Smollett, in his 1771 novel, The Expedition of Humphrey Clinker, gives a brilliant account of how these things actually worked. And he's writing this as an epistolary novel, so you get the sense that he really is trying to write this for someone who hasn't experienced it before. It's very immersive.
Yes. So this is the passage from that text. The bathing machines are ranged along the beach with all their proper utensils and attendants. You have never seen one of these machines. Image to yourself a small, snug wooden chamber fixed upon a wheel carriage, having a door at each end and on each side a little window above, a bench below. The bather, ascending into this apartment by wooden steps, shuts himself in and begins to undress, while the attendant yokes a horse to the end next to the sea and draws the carriage forward till the surface of the water is on the level with the floor of the dressing room. Then he moves and fixes the horse to the other end. A person within, being stripped, opens the door to the seaward, where he finds the guide ready and plunges headlong into the water.
So it's essentially a mobile changing room that deposits you directly into the sea. And for women, there was an additional feature. Smollett describes it, quote, "The guides who attend the ladies in the water are of their own sex, and they and the female bathers have a dress of flannel for the sea. Nay, they are provided with other conveniences for the support of decorum. A certain number of the machines are fitted with tilts that project from the seaward ends of them, so as to screen the bathers from the view of all persons whatsoever."
So the tilts that he's describing are basically like modesty covers. They were specifically invented to be these canvas awnings attached to the back of the bathing machines. And the invention is attributed to a man named Benjamin Beale in the 1750s. And this hood was meant to be let down so that a woman could enter and exit the water in complete privacy.
It's like your beach umbrella that you can take out to sea.
Yes, yes.
This all says a lot about the anxieties this new practice was generating, because if you need to invent a machine specifically to manage the problem of a woman's body near water, you're dealing with a culture that is very actively negotiating what the rules should be.
And Sutherland makes this evolution kind of explicit when she notes that in early images of sea bathing, men and women are openly bathing nude together. As sea bathing becomes fashionable, that is no longer acceptable. We've got to develop new rules.
So different resorts set different restrictions for how to coordinate men and women sea bathing. Some had men bathing at a separate bay, others rang bells to announce designated times for women to bathe, and eventually some form of bathing costume was adopted for both sexes. I like how it went from bathing in the nude together to bathing separately covered, but still fully dressed, Yes. Can we have a medium option here?
No, these are the options. So for women particularly, this had to be a bathing costume made of a material like wool or flannel that was heavy enough not to cling to the skin if modesty was the goal. So the Handbook of English Costume in the 18th century describes flannel specifically from a historical account in 1782. Quote, "The ladies in the morning, when they intend to bathe, put on a long flannel gown under their clothes, walk down to the beach, undress themselves to the flannel. Then they walk in as deep as they please and lay hold of the guides, 3 or 4 together sometimes." So this one seems to be moving away from the bathing machine entirely, but we still have that really heavy focus on being in a flannel gown.
And those guides, the so-called dippers, are worth dwelling on because they're a fascinating professional category that doesn't really exist anymore. Andrea Richards, in her article, Bathing, Jane Austen at the Seaside, writes about dippers and explains that these are an essential accompaniment to the bathing machines. They're mainly local women and some men who escorted their customers into the water and dipped them.
As the bather emerged from the machine, the dipper ensured that they were really getting the whole prescribed sea bathing experience. For example, Sutherland explains that, quote, "Bathers were advised to have some seawater thrown over their heads when first entering the sea, to equalize the temperature of the body and to avoid propelling the blood to the head too swiftly." Again, we got to be cold before we do this.
Sutherland goes on to describe the process in a bit more detail as well. She writes, when bathing, it was necessary to plunge vigorously into the water, to suffer the force of the waves, to feel a momentary sense of suffocation, to experience the shock of the cold water. But it was essential that bathing should be perfectly safe. It must be only a pretense that one could be knocked over, sucked under, and nearly drown. So you're supposed to be out there like, oh my gosh, I might not make it. But like, actually, you're totally fine.
I mean, this is going back to that idea of the sublime, you know? You're like, I'm actually quite afraid, but also really impressed.
It's like their version of going on a roller coaster. You're kind of like, you're getting in this case, you're getting thrills and literal chills, you know? It's all happening.
Wow. Yeah. So this is, again, quite immersive.
Isn't it?
And so bathers were furthermore dipped into the oncoming waves, or if the sea was calm, they had their heads pushed under the water. Richards tells us that for medically prescribed bathing, the standard was apparently 3 total immersions, right? You had to be like dunked multiple times to get this full experience.
First one for luck, second one, you know.
Yes.
So to assist in this vigorous sea bathing, again, that word is very important. Sutherland tells us that these, quote, professional helpers held the bather steady while they were plunged in and submerged.
Yes, some of these dippers became genuinely famous, which I think is right and proper, honestly. Richards notes that if they had dipped members of royalty, they advertised it to attract more visitors to the town. 2 of the most celebrated dippers were at Brighton. First was Martha Gunn, and another was a man known as Old Smoker.
So Martha Gunn worked Brighton Beach for decades. The Morning Herald reported in August 1806, quote, "The beach this morning was thronged with ladies, all anxious to make interest for a dip. The machines, of course, were in very great request, though none could be run into the ocean in consequence of the heavy swell, but remained stationary at the water's edge, from which Martha Gunn and her robust female assistants took their fair charges, closely enveloped in their party-colored dresses, and gently held them to the breakers, which not quite so gently passed over them."
That last phrase is doing a lot of work, honestly. So perhaps it's not surprising that for first-time bathers, this could be a bit terrifying, which is exactly why Austen in Sanditon has Miss Diana Parker feel the need to, quote, encourage Miss Lamb in taking her first dip. She tells us that she has, quote, promised to come and keep up her spirits and go in the machine with her if she wished it. So this is not like a weird thing for Miss Parker to offer. She is genuinely trying to be moral support for someone who's going bathing for the first time.
Okay, so let's bring all this back to Emma and how it helps us to understand that passage at the top of the episode. We're told that the sea air and bathing were recommended specifically for the weakness in little Bella's throat.
And even if we don't know exactly what Bella's diagnosis is, Alexander Peter Buchan, in his 1810 treatise on sea bathing, is quite specific about throat conditions. He writes, "Persons of a delicate habit of body resident in great towns are liable to a peculiar species of sore throat, which has been termed aphthous." So again, even though we don't know what Bella's diagnosis is, I do feel like this idea of like Buchan throwing shade at London air is something that Mr. Woodhouse would fully support.
Oh, yeah. He doesn't support the sea bathing, but it's hard for him. He's like, oh, I was reading this treatise, and there were parts of it I really was on board with.
Like London air. Nobody's healthy there.
Yeah.
But the sea, not the solution.
Not into that part of it. Buchan continues, "This disease is characterized by a relaxation of the uvula and a honeycomb-like appearance of the glands situated in the inside of the throat. A sallowness of complexion and great listlessness and aversion to bodily exertion commonly attend this disease." And crucially for our purposes, he then writes that, quote, "Several instances of this complaint have come within my notice, which have always been removed by a short residence at the seaside, accompanied with bathing."
Miracle cure. So when Austen has Isabella cite Bella's throat as a specific reason for the South End trip, she is kind of invoking a recognized diagnosis and therapeutic category. So, Mr. Wingfield's recommendation here is at least medically coherent for the standards of the period.
And it's worth noting that Buchan was not the most colorful voice in this conversation. The physician Richard Russell, who was really the founding figure of British sea bathing medicine, had his own treatment for throat conditions that involved, wait for it, sea slime mixed with ass's milk. Yum.
Wow. So the takeaway here is that by the time Austen is writing Emma, there's an entire, very earnest medical literature telling you that the seaside will cure your child's throat, and the prescription involves getting up at 5 a.m, being wheeled into the January sea by a horse, then being plunged under the waves 3 times by Martha Gunn, and then drinking sea slime. That's what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sounds about right. Jane Darcy's article, Jane Austen's Sanditon, Doctors and the Rise of Sea Bathing, reminds us that Austen understood all of this with real precision, not just the specific complaints being treated at the seaside, but the broader culture of what Darcy calls hypochondria in the medical vernacular of the time.
In its dominant 18th century meaning, hypochondria was a recognized physical disease located in the lower abdomen and attended by digestive disorders and what we might call depression, but what the texts call melancholy. Darcy argues it was believed to affect only the elite of society, and one of its major prescribed treatments was, of course, sea bathing.
Which is why the whole medical argument in that Emma passage, Mr. Wingfield versus Mr. Perry, the sea air versus staying home, is not just comic fussing on Mr. Woodhouse's part. It's a real period debate conducted with real medical seriousness. And we should say that even if Mr. Woodhouse is attributing his own arguments to Perry, it's completely plausible that Perry and Wingfield could have been on opposite sides of this debate because it was very much a discussion during this time.
Yes.
It also makes sense for a man of Mr. Woodhouse's generation that maybe he's a little bit more skeptical of the sea and the sea bathing, you know? In his mind, it's still this dangerous place. Like, it almost killed me.
Yeah, he's like, we went to spas in my day.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
If bath was good enough for my generation, it's good enough for your generation.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Precisely. Yes.
It won't kill you like the sea, which did almost murder me that one time.
Which, you know, again, I need that backstory. Emma moves on from that rather quickly, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's Mr. Woodhouse, so it could have just been like a wave kind of gently lapped over his foot. Like, who knows? Or he could have actually been like dragged under.
He's like, Martha Gunn and I have history.
Because, like, he's not wrong. You know, you have to respect the sea. You know? Don't mess around.
So true. So very true.
But yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? That even just like the kind of generational difference that he would kind of be like, I don't know about this.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this debate could also be kind of held at the level of which sea bathing resort you want to attend. Like, that's going to weigh in as well. So in the same chapter that we had from the top of this episode, we have Isabella and Mr. Woodhouse having a debate about not just sea bathing, but like sea bathing locations and whether they are effective. So again, the Knightleys have been to South End, as we read at the top of the episode. And then Austen writes that for the Knightleys, quote, all the holidays of this autumn had been given to sea bathing for the children, and it was therefore many months since they had been seen in a regular way by their Surrey connections.
Then we learn that they have been in South End, which Mr. Woodhouse doesn't particularly approve of. If you must go to the sea, it had better not have been to South End. South End is an unhealthy place. Perry was surprised to hear you had fixed upon South End.
Isabella then defends it as a place that was very beneficial to the children and definitely recommended by Mr. Wingfield, who is her medical man in her corner. It is also a fairly convenient location since South End is only a 40-mile carriage ride for her family.
Mr. Woodhouse then says, you should have gone to Cromer, my dear, if you went anywhere. Perry was a week at Cromer once, and he holds it to be the best of all the sea-bathing places. A fine open sea, he says, and very pure air. And by what I understand, you might have had lodgings there quite away from the sea. A quarter of a mile off. Very comfortable. You should have consulted Perry.
Well, and it's because that Mr. Woodhouse is having all of these opinions about where they should have gone, etc., that John Knightley gets a little bit cantankerous. Like, this is what he says. If Mr. Perry can tell me how to convey a wife and 5 children at a distance of 130 miles with no greater expense or inconvenience than a distance of 40, I should be as willing to prefer Cromer to Southend as he could himself. I kind of love John Knightley in this moment. Like definitely he's being a bit cranky because that's kind of his MO. But also he's like dealing with a bunch of kids in a carriage. Okay.
Yeah. Leaving the family dynamics behind for a minute, we thought it would be worth exploring a bit more about each of these resort towns from guides of the period to see what Austen is riffing on. So here is a bit of information about Southend.
Southend is how Austen spells it, or Southend-on-Sea today, is a coastal city in southeastern Essex. and it's on the north side of the Thames estuary. Up to the 1780s, it was relatively rural, but the 1790s saw the building projects for this to become a resort town, and things really started moving.
According to the 1805 Guide to All the Watering and Sea Bathing Places, with a description of the lakes, a sketch of a tour in Wales, and itineraries, written by John Feltham, Southend, quote, became noticed as a watering place about 15 years ago.
So, 1790, if you're doing the math, which I need to do sometimes. He then describes the shore, quote, "The soil is sandy and the shore flat, and so shallow that at low water a stranger could suppose that the sea had totally abandoned the place. The air is esteemed very dry and salubrious, and the water, notwithstanding its mixture with the Thames, is clear and sufficiently salty."
The reference to the shallowness of the water is likely what Isabella is referring to when she says, "We never found the least inconvenience from the mud," while defending Southend. The location had gained significant popularity by this time, and, as Sutherland writes, it was known as, quote, "London on the sea," though the facetious called it London on the mud.
The guide informs readers that in 1800, the major shorefront properties were under new management and that there were some affluent patrons and residents. So, for example, we know that Lord Nelson spent time there. He was charged with defending the Thames estuary. So, we have a notable person in residence at certain times.
Other visitors of note were Princess Charlotte of Wales, daughter of George IV, who visited Southend in 1801 for sea bathing as advised by her physicians. And Feltham specifically observes that, quote, "The number of summer visitants has recently increased rapidly, and among them have been personages of the first distinction, particularly Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales," and that visit occurred in 1803.
So by the time that Isabella and the Knightleys are visiting Southend, it has a relatively solid reputation not only as a sea-bathing town, but as one that has royal patronage. It's also a town that has assembly rooms, a circulating library, a theater, a hotel, and lots of other amenities that one associated with the fancier resort towns of the day. Take into account that it is, again, only 40 miles from London. It makes sense that this would be the destination that the Knightleys choose to visit.
Mr. Woodhouse, however, advises Cromer, again, if you must go to the sea. Cromer, as Feltham describes it, is situated, quote, "on the northeast of the county of Norfolk, is distant about 130 miles from London through Durham and 133 through Norwich."
The leading description of Cromer from Feltham reads, "Though the interior of Cromer presents little to interest, its exterior is replete with beauties of the first magnitude, and it is by no means surprising that a situation commanding so many attractions should have been thought by those who are engaged in the ardent search of pleasure or of that more endearing possession, health."
He goes on to observe that the, quote, "bathing machines are on a good plan and are attended by careful persons. The shore, which is a fine, firm sand, not only renders bathing delightful, but when the tide retires, presents a charming level for many miles."
That said, the town does not have many hotels, assembly rooms, or theater, but it does have a small circulating library. And while Feltham may not have been able to sway us with the more overt entertainments of the resort town, he does create some great copy for their tourism board. So here's what he writes.
"But towards the close of a fine summer's evening, when the sun, declining in full splendor, tints the whole scene with a golden glow, the seashore becomes an object truly sublime. The noble expanse of blue water on the one hand, the distant sail catching the last rays of the setting sun, contrasted on the other by the rugged surfaces of the impending cliffs, the stillness of the scene, interrupted on by the gentle murmurs of the waves tailing at your feet."
It's interesting to notice how these descriptions largely fit with the things that probably would have been a draw to Mr. Woodhouse and via Perry, obviously.
So the open sea is one of the biggest selling points, and the distance from the sea to convenient lodgings both come up in the guide. And it's fairly easy to see that this would appeal to Mr. Woodhouse more than a relatively busy, bustling resort town like Southend.
I mean, the houses are more than a quarter mile off. This is very appealing.
Exactly, yes.
And then at the same time, you could see that Southend would appeal on practical levels to the Knightleys. Again, not just for proximity, but for a younger couple, specifically with younger children. They might want to be able to access some of the entertainments and amenities of a larger, up-and-coming resort town.
This whole chapter, with the implied dueling opinions of Perry and Wingfield, Isabella and Mr. Woodhouse, is all happening while Emma and Mr. Knightley are both making desperate attempts to distract and diffuse from this whole debate around sea bathing. They are really trying. They're trying so hard. Not very subtly, but...
No. The attempts are very overt, but it feels like that's the only thing that could derail things, honestly. And it's perhaps also a beautiful kind of Easter egg that at the end of the novel, when Mr. Knightley and Emma are engaged, that, quote, they had determined that their marriage ought to be concluded while John and Isabella were still at Hartfield, to allow them the fortnight's absence in a tour to the seaside, which was the plan. John and Isabella and every other friend were agreed in approving it. But Mr. Woodhouse, how was Mr. Woodhouse to be induced to consent?
Not only are they going to leave on a 2-week honeymoon, but they're going to go to the seaside.
It nearly killed him once, okay?
This poor guy. So Brighton, Lyme, and Weymouth have all had their own episodes, but it might be worth mentioning that we also have references to Ramsgate in Pride and Prejudice, and we also have Mrs. Bennet stating that a little sea bathing would set me up forever. So, and this, again, fits in with her perpetual worries about her nerves, etc.
Right, and Lydia going to Brighton. This is just her being like, hint, nudge, I would like to go to the sea. Persuasion also specifically mentions bathing machines at Lyme, which I think is kind of interesting. And so this is, again, when they are visiting, we have this quote from the book. They were come too late in the year for any amusement or variety, which Lyme as a public place might offer. The rooms were shut up, the lodgers almost all gone, scarcely any family but of the residents left. And as there is nothing to admire in the buildings themselves, the remarkable situation of the town, the principal street almost hurrying into the water, the walk to the Cobb, skirting round the pleasant little bay, which, in the season, is animated with bathing machines and company. So we do get this very scenic view of this coastal town, but the bathing machines are kind of just waiting for the people to come.
And in Sanditon, Mr. Parker obviously has a lot of feelings about the seaside. The sea air and sea bathing together were nearly infallible, one or other of them being a match for every disorder of the stomach, the lungs, or the blood. They were anti-spasmodic, anti-pulmonary, anti-bilious, and anti-rheumatic. Nobody could catch cold by the sea. Nobody wanted appetite by the sea. Nobody wanted spirit. Nobody wanted strength. If the sea breeze failed, the sea bath was a certain corrective. And when bathing disagreed, the sea breeze alone was evidently designed by nature for the cure.
Feels like an infomercial you would listen to at night.
Yeah, he is definitely the Ron Popeil of the sea, for sure.
So there's lots of references to the sea and sea bathing in Austen's work. And that's perhaps because of Austen's own experiences of the seaside. Because she didn't just write about it, she went to the seaside repeatedly. And from all the information we have, it seems like she really enjoyed it.
In 1801, after Austen's father had retired, Mr. and Mrs. Austen, Cassandra, and Jane moved to Bath, which, from the evidence we have, was not something Jane was particularly excited about.
But Maggie Lane, in Jane Austen's England, notes that, quote, an intrinsic part of the plan was that they should escape from the heat of the city every summer by taking a seaside holiday. It was indeed this element that consoled Jane for all the rest. The prospect of spending future summers by the sea or in Wales is very delightful, she wrote in anticipation.
So even before the first holiday actually happened, the seaside was functioning as a thing that made Bath bearable, which tells us something about what it might have meant to her.
And they really did go. Claire Tomlin in Jane Austen, A Life, describes Mr. Austen at 70 as, quote, a wonderfully enthusiastic and resilient tourist who was particularly keen on the resort towns of the Devon and Dorset coast. And over the next few years, she writes, the family visited Sidmouth, Dawlish, Tynemouth, Weymouth, Worthing, Lyme Regis, possibly Wales as well.
All the musts. They went to all the musts. That said, we have very limited documentation about these travels. Southam writes, unfortunately for our seaside account, such an instance arises here, a gap of over 3 years, from the end of May 1801 until mid-September 1804. And he's referring to the gaps in Austen's letters. A dire loss, since it extends across the very time when the Austens were at their most active as seaside visitors. Nor to fill the gap, however inadequately, is there any other contemporary record we can turn to.
He writes that beyond the bare facts of where they went, quote, we have virtually no details of the family's resort comings and goings, of the society they encountered, of new acquaintanceships made and old friendships renewed, of the seaside pursuits they followed.
Which means that some of the most active, most traveled, most experienced years of Austen's seaside life are almost undocumented, but we do have a few snippets.
In a letter to Cassandra dated the 14th of September, 1804, and it was written from Lyme, Austen writes, "The bathing was so delightful this morning, and Molly so pressing with me to enjoy myself that I believe I stayed in rather too long, as since the middle of the day I have felt unreasonably tired. I shall be more careful another time, and shall not bathe tomorrow as I had before intended."
After everything we've described in this episode, the 5 a.m. start, the bathing machine rolling into the cold water, the dipper's hands, the shock of the waves, here is Jane Austen saying she stayed in too long because it was so delightful, and Molly kept encouraging her to enjoy herself.
I love that.
She's a little mermaid out there, just having a great time.
Yes. And I do love that she's like, I may have overdone it. And then she's like, but I will be better tomorrow. And that honestly feels very authentic to Austen, being like, okay, so I really indulged. I will do better next day.
I will be very sensible about it the next day.
Yes.
Tomlin adds that, quote, "For Jane Austen, there was the pleasure of coastal walks and sea bathing, although she seems never to have learnt to swim. She had to be content with a bathing machine and a maid to attend her when she took a plunge. Even so, bathing, like dancing, was a bodily pleasure she could joyously indulge to excess." She's just out there riding those waves, being dunked under the water.
And we can't talk about Austen and the sea without mentioning her possible seaside romance. And a big caveat for this section, scholars are kind of all over the place about how they write about this, how likely they think it was to be factual, etc.
This is one of those, we're
going to just report what we've got.
Yes. So Sue Wilkes reports that Jane's niece Caroline was told by Cassandra that in about 1801, during a seaside trip, possibly Sidmouth, Jane met a young man who seemed greatly attracted to her, and he had fallen in love. But her unnamed suitor died suddenly. Cassandra thought he was, in Caroline's words, worthy of her sister, and that he would have been a successful suitor. And Wilkes is not the only one. This is the one that we're
quoting from her, but there's lots of other accounts.
Yes, she is not alone in this account.
Yeah. However, Maggie Lane argues that there is, quote, "no documentary evidence, only a family tradition originating in a remark by Cassandra in her old age." Lane then says there might have been nothing at all to this. We just really don't know.
There seems to be consensus that this suitor was a clergyman, with some scholars speculating that he might have been the brother of a Sidmouth physician. And while most seem to agree that he likely died, again, if he existed at all, Lucy Worsley in her book, Jane Austen at Home, mentions another possibility.
She writes, "This mysterious gentleman was even given a name by another Austen cousin, Catherine Hubbock, who called him Dr. Blackall. Her version of the story has the couple part with the coming of autumn, but the mysterious admirer was urgent to know where they would be next summer, implying or perhaps saying that he should be there also wherever it might be. He had fallen in love with Aunt Jane, and there was no doubt either that he would have been a successful suitor."
However, Worsley points out that not everyone in the family agrees on all of the details, including dates, locations, and the name of the man in question. As she writes, "From all these confused family memories, the only safe facts to emerge are that somewhere early in the 19th century, Jane had a holiday romance in a West Country watering place. Anna Lefroy's daughter Fanny is the most specific about who he really was. A young clergyman then was visiting his brother, who was one of the doctors of the town."
There was a Reverend Samuel Blackall known to the Austens, but he definitely did not die after a summer at the seaside, and in fact is considered by some to have at least partially inspired the character of Mr. Collins.
So, all that to say, we don't really know, so you are all free to speculate as you wish.
It's something that people definitely conjecture about quite a bit.
It comes up quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we had to mention it here.
Yeah. So then let's talk just briefly how the idea of the seaside shows up in adaptations, and I'm thinking particularly of adaptations of Emma, since that's the one we've been focusing on today. And I do want to point out that in the 2009 adaptation, they really play up this idea of Emma and Knightley's honeymoon to the seaside, and it's adorable because she's mentioned it that she's never been to the seaside, and so then again it's Romola Garai doing so much with her face and her eyes.
Yeah, she's the best eye actress in the world.
It's so good. And so, it's kind of like you get the idea that she's being surprised by Mr. and Knightley as to where they're going to be. And then she sees that they are at the coast and she just does this gasp and she's like, the seaside. And it's so cute. It's so cute that they that they really embed this moment in the films, because not only is it part of the book, but I think you get a feel for the fact that this was an important place to Austen as well. The seaside was an important place.
I think it was a very, very cute choice.
So cute.
And then in the 2022 Persuasion, we have Anne Elliot walking into the sea. So she's taking herself on a full sea bathing excursion.
I mean, the drama of it all, right? And obviously Sanditon is an entire resort-based thing.
Yes.
So we don't want to dismiss that, but also it's too much for us to dissect moments from.
So to wrap things up, we want to go back to Austen's biography for just a bit. In January 1801, a cousin, Edward Cooper, the rector of Hamstall Ridware, very kindly invited the Austens to spend the summer at his home in Staffordshire instead of going to Sidmouth as they had planned.
And this is such a gem of a letter. So Austen writes to Cassandra, "He is so kind as to want us all to come to Hamstall this summer, instead of going to the sea. But we are not so kind as to mean to do it. The summer after, if you please, Mr. Cooper. But for the present, we greatly prefer the sea to all our relations." That is Jane Austen, everybody. That is Jane Austen.
She's like, I had plans, and I am not going to change them. Thank you very much.
Sea or awkward conversation with distant relatives.
Yeah.
It's not a question for her.
Well, if you have any thoughts on sea bathing, the sea air, the Battle of Seaside Resorts, you can find us on our website, thethingaboutaustin.com, or you can email us at thethingaboutaustin@gmail.com. And if you would like to support the podcast, you can head to our Patreon, patreon.com/thethingaboutaustin. And another easy way to support us is by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And this week we want to share this lovely review from Laura Ash, who says, "The best of the best, universally acknowledged. My favorite podcast about Jane Austen. Every episode brings new life to the stories we know and love." So thank you.
Thank you so much. And stay tuned for next episode, where we'll be talking about 10,000 a year.
Thanks for listening. Bye.